Elvis Presley changed the world 3 times, and each time it cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. The first change came in 1954, when a white boy sang black music and suddenly segregation had a crack in its armor. The second came in 1956, when he swiveled his hips on television and teenagers everywhere understood that rebellion could be beautiful. The third change was quieter, the moment America realized that fame could destroy as efficiently as it could elevate. Elvis didn't just revolutionize music, he became the cautionary tale, the sacrifice on the altar of celebrity, the proof that the American dream might actually be a nightmare in disguise. He hadn't meant to start a revolution. He just liked the music he heard in the black churches and juke joints of Memphis, the way it made bodies move and souls soar. But when he took that sound mainstream, when his white face gave permission to white kids to love black art, he split American culture in half. Parents panicked, preachers condemned, politicians investigated, and Elvis, bewildered by the fury, kept singing, kept moving, kept being himself, until being himself became an impossibility, and a performance took its place. The hip shake, the sneer, the voice that could whisper and wail, they made him the king. But kingdoms require constant defense, and Elvis became a soldier in a war he never wanted to fight. Every performance was a battle. Every camera flash was enemy fire. Every screaming fan wanted a piece until there were no pieces left. The army drafted him, hoping to domesticate the threat. Hollywood tamed him with contracts and mediocre scripts. Vegas turned him into a nostalgia act, replaying his own greatest hits like a man haunting his own ghost. By 42, Elvis had become what America does to its revolutionaries: a monument, a memory, a warning. He'd torn down walls just by being authentic, but authenticity is the first casualty of fame. They wanted Elvis Presley the icon, not Elvis Presley the man. So, the man faded, bit by bit, pill by pill, until only the icon remained, and then even that collapsed. The revolution succeeded. The revolutionary didn't survive it. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for your support. Thank you for subscribing. The Shotgun Shack on Old Saltillo Road in Tupelo, Mississippi, had 2 rooms and a family of 3 when Elvis Aaron Presley entered the world on January 8, 1935. His twin brother, Jesse Garin, arrived first, stillborn, silent, a ghost before he'd drawn breath. Elvis would spend his life feeling incomplete, as if half of him had been buried in that unmarked grave in Priceville Cemetery. Gladys Love Presley held her surviving son so tightly he could barely breathe, and maybe that was the first lesson Elvis learned. Love could suffocate as easily as it could sustain. They were poor in a way that makes poverty poetic only in retrospect. Vernon Presley moved from job to job, scheme to scheme, his ambitions larger than his abilities. Gladys took in laundry and housekeeping work, her hands raw from lye soap and other people's dirt. Elvis wore clothes made from flour sacks, carried his lunch in a paper bag that had to last the week, knew hunger as an intimate companion. But on Sundays, there was church, the Assembly of God on Adams Street, and there was music. The Pentecostal services were theater and transcendence combined. Bodies swayed, voices rose in glossolalia. The congregation moved as one organism reaching toward heaven. Elvis, small and shy and desperately eager to please, absorbed it all. The rhythm, the passion, the way music could transform suffering into something sacred. Years later, he would say that gospel was the only music that fed his soul. Everything else was just his body going through motions. But gospel wasn't the only sound infiltrating his consciousness. Tupelo had a black side of town, shake rag, they called it. And music poured from its juke joints and street corners, blues and rhythm, pain and pleasure entwined in 3-chord progressions. Elvis would stand at the edges, listening, watching, absorbing a language his white neighbors pretended not to understand. The music spoke of things polite society wouldn't acknowledge: desire, injustice, the raw reality of being human in an inhuman world. Elvis filed it all away, every lick and moan, building a vocabulary he'd later speak fluently. At 11, his parents couldn't afford the bicycle he wanted for his birthday. Gladys steered him toward the hardware store, where they sold guitars for $12.95. Elvis wanted to ride. Gladys knew he needed to sing. She always knew. The guitar was a poor substitute for a Schwinn, but Elvis learned to love it the way the lonely learn to love anything that fills the silence. His fingers were clumsy at first, the strings biting into soft skin, but he persisted. Music was patient with him when nothing else was. In 1948, Vernon's latest scheme collapsed. Bad checks, a prison sentence narrowly avoided. The Presleys fled Tupelo for Memphis, landing in Lauderdale Courts, a public housing project that felt like a palace after Tupelo's deprivation. Elvis was 13, awkward in his changing body, desperate to belong and terrified of standing out. He grew his sideburns long, greased his hair into a ducktail, wore pink shirts and pegged pants purchased from Lansky Brothers on Beale Street. His classmates at Humes High School mocked him. "Hey Elvis, where's the show?" But on Beale Street, Black Memphis's beating heart, his clothes made sense. He was trying to become something his white neighbors couldn't understand. Himself. By 18, Elvis was driving a truck for Crown Electric, $125 an hour delivering supplies across Memphis. His ambitions were modest, maybe work his way up to electrician, marry a nice girl, buy his mama a house. But there was that $4 vanity recording he'd made at Sun Records, My Happiness for Gladys's birthday. And there was Sam Phillips, the visionary producer who'd been telling anyone who'd listen, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion." Sam called Elvis back in July 1954. They tried ballads, standards, everything conventional. Nothing sparked. Then, during a break, Elvis picked up his guitar and started fooling around with That's All Right, an Arthur Crudup blues number. He was just playing, his body loose, his voice free from trying. Scotty Moore on guitar and Bill Black on bass joined in, and suddenly the air in that tiny studio shifted. Sam Phillips stuck his head out of the control booth. "What are you doing?" Elvis shrugged. "We don't know?" Sam grinned. "Well, back up and do it again." That recording changed everything. Dewey Phillips, no relation to Sam, played it on his Red Hot and Blue show on WDIA, and the phone lines exploded. White kids and black kids both claimed Elvis as their own, hearing in his voice permission to cross lines that had seemed uncrossable. He wasn't quite country, wasn't quite blues, wasn't quite gospel. He was all of it, synthesized in the body of a polite white boy who called everyone sir and loved his mama. America didn't have a word for what Elvis was doing. Eventually, they'd call it rock and roll. The performances started small. High school gyms, county fairs, opening slots for established acts. Elvis would take the stage in his thrift store finery, his legs shaking from nervousness, and the shaking would become part of the act. His left leg would start bouncing, his hips would swivel, his whole body would become an instrument playing music the audience could feel in their spines. Girls screamed, boys watched in wonder and horror, parents clutched their pearls. Elvis, bewildered by the response, just kept doing what felt natural. He wasn't trying to be sexual, he was trying to survive the intensity of performance, the terror and exhilaration of standing in front of people who could reject you with silence. His body moved to discharge the energy, to channel the music through flesh. But America saw those hips and projected everything they feared about young black men onto this safe white vessel. Elvis became dangerous without meaning to, revolutionary without intending it. All he wanted was to sing. The world demanded he be a symbol. By 1955, Colonel Tom Parker had entered the picture, carnival barker turned music manager, illegal immigrant hiding behind a fake identity, brilliant manipulator with dollar signs for eyes. Parker saw in Elvis the rarest of commodities, authentic talent that could be packaged for mass consumption. He began maneuvering to take over Elvis's management, promising Vernon and Gladys that he'd make their boy a star. What he didn't mention was the cost of such transformation. Parker's first major move was selling Elvis's Sun Records contract to RCA Victor for $40,000, an unprecedented sum that made national news. Elvis was thrilled. His parents were relieved. Parker took his percentage and began planning how to extract maximum value from his new asset. In January 1956, Elvis recorded Heartbreak Hotel at RCA's Nashville studio. The song was strange, echoey, soaked in loneliness. It shouldn't have worked. It went to #1 and stayed there. Television came calling. The Dorsey Brothers stage show, the Milton Berle show, the Steve Allen Show in a tuxedo, singing to a basset hound. Parker's idea to diffuse the controversy, to make Elvis safe for American living rooms. But it was Ed Sullivan who mattered. Sullivan had initially sworn he'd never have that Presley boy on his show. Then he saw the ratings when competitors booked Elvis, and principals yielded to profit. The fee was $50,000 for 3 appearances, more than any performer had ever been paid. Parker negotiated it personally. That first Sullivan appearance, September 9th, 1956, drew 60 million viewers, 82.6% of the television audience. America stopped to watch Elvis Presley swivel his hips and sneer at convention. The next morning, he was the most famous person in the world. The morning after that, he was a problem to be solved. Preachers denounced him from pulpits. The FBI opened a file. Politicians called for censorship. By the third Sullivan appearance, the cameras only showed Elvis from the waist up. America could handle the voice. The hips were too honest. Elvis didn't understand the fury. He read his Bible, attended church when he could, treated everyone with Southern courtesy. He loved his country, respected authority, wanted only to make his mama proud. But his body told a truth that 1950s America wasn't ready to acknowledge. That passion existed, that desire was natural, that the strict binary between black and white culture was artificial and unsustainable. Elvis was just being himself. Himself was revolutionary. The movies began in 1956 with Love Me Tender, a Civil War drama that killed Elvis's character in the final reel. Girls wept in theaters across America. The studio panicked and filmed an alternate ending where Elvis lived. Parker saw the future, formula films with built-in soundtracks, maximum profit for minimum risk. Elvis dreamed of being James Dean, of doing serious work with method directors. Parker signed him to contracts that made him a singing cowboy in beach party pictures. Then came the draft notice. December 1957, Uncle Sam calling. Parker could have gotten Elvis a deferment or a cushy assignment in special services, entertaining troops. Instead, he saw opportunity. Let Elvis serve as a regular soldier, Parker reasoned. It would neutralize the controversy, prove Elvis was a good American boy, and, most importantly, keep him out of the public eye long enough that his return would feel like a resurrection. Elvis reported to Fort Hood, Texas, in March 1958. They shaved his famous hair. He became US 533-10761, just another private. What Parker couldn't have anticipated was Gladys. She had never been well, her health compromised by years of poverty and worry. With Elvis gone, she deteriorated rapidly. Hepatitis, cirrhosis, her body giving up the ghost. Elvis got emergency leave in August 1958, rushed to her bedside at Methodist Hospital in Memphis. She was 46 years old and looked 70. "Don't you worry none, baby," she whispered. "I'll be all right." She died the next day. Elvis broke. Witnesses described a man coming apart at the seams, wailing, collapsing, unable to accept that the person who'd loved him unconditionally was gone. "She's all I lived for," he sobbed at the funeral. "Everything I have is gone." It wasn't hyperbole. Gladys had been his anchor, his truth teller, the only person who saw Elvis Aaron Presley instead of Elvis the phenomenon. Without her, he was unmoored, drifting in seas that would eventually drown him. He returned to Germany, to his army unit, a hollowed-out version of himself. The other soldiers left him alone with his grief. And then he met Priscilla Beaulieu. She was 14, the stepdaughter of an Air Force captain, and she looked at Elvis with uncomplicated adoration. No judgment, no expectations beyond his presence. Elvis, 24 and orphaned in every way that mattered, found in Priscilla something he desperately needed, someone to shape, to protect, to love who wouldn't leave him. That she was a child barely registered. He'd been public property since 19. Appropriate boundaries were luxuries he'd never been taught. When Elvis returned to America in 1960, Parker orchestrated a media blitz. A Frank Sinatra special, new recordings, a return to glory. But something had shifted. The Elvis who'd terrified America with his dangerous authenticity had been replaced by a safer model, more polished, less raw, carefully managed. The revolution had been domesticated. What emerged from the army was no longer a threat. It was a brand. The 1960s became the wilderness years. Elvis made movies, 3 a year, sometimes more, that even he knew were garbage. Blue Hawaii, girls, 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 clam bake, interchangeable plots about singing while surfing or driving or rescuing someone. The soundtracks were paint by numbers. The scripts, insults to intelligence. Elvis showed up, hit his marks, collected his paycheck, and died a little more inside with each passing day. He'd wanted to be an actor. Instead, he became a jukebox with hair. Meanwhile, the world was changing without him. The Beatles landed in America in 1964, and suddenly Elvis's pompadour and pelvis looked quaint. Bob Dylan was making music that mattered. The Rolling Stones were dangerous in ways that made 1950s Elvis look tame. Civil rights protests, Vietnam, the counterculture. Music was the voice of revolution again, and Elvis was making beach party movies. He'd broken the door down. Everyone else had walked through it while he stood frozen in the doorway. Priscilla had moved into Graceland, the 23-room mansion. Elvis had purchased for Gladys, who'd lived there barely a year before, dying. Priscilla was still a teenager, still being molded into Elvis's ideal woman, the clothes he chose, the hair he wanted, the behavior he demanded. They married in 1967, a quickie Vegas ceremony orchestrated by Parker as a publicity event. 9 months later, Lisa Marie was born. Elvis held his daughter and wept, seeing in her tiny face another person he'd inevitably fail. He was failing at everything by then. The movies had become a prison of his own making, each one worse than the last. His body, once lithe and electric, was thickening from inactivity and prescription medications. The pills had started innocently. Army issued uppers to stay alert, then sleeping pills to come down, then pain pills for various ailments real and imagined. Dr. Nick, George Nicopolis, his personal physician, wrote prescriptions like they were grocery lists. Elvis had pharmaceutical answers for every human problem: boredom, anxiety, grief, exhaustion, existential despair. But something was stirring. A television special, a comeback. Parker pitched it as a Christmas show, safe and seasonal. Steve Bander, the director, saw something else. An opportunity to remind the world who Elvis had been before Hollywood neutered him. "Do you want to be known as the guy who made all those crappy movies?" Binder asked. "Or do you want to show them you're still the king?" The '68 comeback special aired December 3rd, 1968, and it was resurrection. Elvis in black leather, sitting in the round with a small audience, guitar in hand, sweat pouring, voice raw and powerful. He looked dangerous again, vital, real. The hip shake returned, not calculated but spontaneous. For 48 minutes, Elvis Presley existed outside the myth, just a man making music that mattered. America watched and remembered why they'd fallen in love with him in the first place. 50 million viewers, the highest-rated program NBC had all year. It should have been a new beginning. Instead, it was a beautiful mirage before the final desert crossing. Parker, threatened by Elvis's renewed autonomy, immediately locked him into a Vegas residency. 1,000 shows over 7 years at the International Hotel. Vegas was safe, controllable, profitable. Elvis wanted to tour the world, to reclaim his relevance. Parker, unable to travel internationally due to his immigration status, insisted Vegas was enough. Elvis, trained from childhood to defer to authority, agreed. The comeback became an extended goodbye. The Vegas years were strange, surreal, increasingly sad. Elvis wore jumpsuits that cost thousands of dollars and weighed 40 pounds, elaborate costumes that were part superhero, part Elvis parody. The shows were spectacular in their excess: full orchestra, gospel quartet, karate demonstrations, cape twirls. Tourists came to see the king, and the king performed kingship with diminishing enthusiasm and increasing pharmaceutical assistance. Off-stage, his life was chaos barely contained. Priscilla left in 1972, taking Lisa Marie, unable to compete with the pills and the loneliness and the fundamental impossibility of being married to a legend. Elvis cycled through girlfriends, surrounding himself with beauty he couldn't truly see. The Memphis Mafia, his entourage of yes-men, enabled his every destructive impulse, dependent on his checks and afraid to contradict him. Graceland became both playground and prison, its gates keeping the world out, but also keeping Elvis trapped inside his own mythology. The pills multiplied: Demerol, Dilaudid, Percodan, Quaalude, Valium, Dexedrine, a pharmaceutical cocktail that Dr. Nick provided without limit or conscience. Elvis needed uppers to perform, downers to sleep, painkillers to exist, tranquilizers to cope. His body swelled, his face bloated beyond recognition. By 1975, he was barely recognizable as the lean revolutionary who terrified America 2 decades earlier. But he kept performing, kept climbing on stage, kept giving audiences what they'd paid to see. Some nights, he was brilliant, channeling the old magic, his voice still capable of breaking hearts when his body could barely stand. Other nights, he forgot lyrics, slurred words, stumbled through songs like a man performing his own eulogy. The audience never complained. They'd come to see Elvis Presley, and even at 50% capacity, ruined by excess and neglect, he was still more compelling than anyone else alive. What nobody said, what everyone knew, was that Elvis was dying in public, each performance a small death, each tour stop another nail in an elaborately jeweled coffin. His friends saw it. His girlfriends saw it. His daughter, when he managed to see her, saw it with the clear-eyed terror of a child watching her father disappear. But Elvis was trapped in the machine of his own making. The contracts Parker had signed, the expectations millions of fans carried, the mythology that required him to remain the king even as the man underneath suffocated. He talks sometimes about the life he might have lived, quiet, normal, no spotlights or screaming, working regular hours, coming home to family, walking to the grocery store without causing riots. But it was fantasy. Elvis Presley at 22 had made choices, or had choices made for him, that eliminated such possibilities forever. At 42, he was a prisoner of those ancient decisions, trapped in a golden cage of everyone's making and no one's responsibility. There were attempts at change, a divorce from Priscilla that freed no one, a spiritual exploration that led nowhere, books on philosophy and religion that promised meaning but delivered only more questions, brief romances with women who thought they could save him, who learned quickly that no one could save a man determined to destroy himself slowly, publicly, with maximum drama and minimum self-awareness. The last year, 1977, was a terrible pageant of decay. Elvis toured despite being barely able to move, each performance a medical crisis averted by pharmaceutical intervention. He forgot lyrics to songs he'd sung 10,000 times. He rambled incoherently between numbers, his jumpsuit-clad body swaying like a tree about to fall. The audience pretended not to notice, complicit in the delusion that their king was merely tired, not dying. In July, his last book was delivered, a study on the Shroud of Turin, because Elvis was obsessed with evidence of resurrection, as if proof of Jesus rising might suggest his own redemption was possible. He never finished it. His attention span, fractured by pills and exhaustion, couldn't sustain focus beyond a page or two. August 16, 1977, started like any other day at Graceland. Elvis spent the afternoon in his bedroom, door locked, reading and taking pills in combinations that would alarm any medical professional not on his payroll. Late afternoon, he went into his bathroom, a book in hand. He never came back out. Ginger Alden, his girlfriend, found him on the floor around 2:30 p.m., his face pressed against red shag carpet, his body twisted in what must have been agony, his pajama bottoms around his ankles. There was nothing regal about how Elvis Presley died. It was human, undignified, alone despite a mansion full of people. The autopsy would list cardiac arrhythmia as the cause, but everyone knew the truth. Elvis had died of being Elvis, of carrying a burden no human body was designed to bear. The world stopped. Or it felt like it did for anyone who'd lived through Elvis's revolution. Thousands descended on Graceland, weeping, disbelieving, laying flowers at gates that had protected him from nothing that mattered. President Carter issued a statement. Radio stations played his music on loop, and slowly, the grief gave way to assessment. Who had Elvis been? What had he meant? Why did his death feel like losing something essential about America itself? He'd been the bridge, the translator, the white boy who loved black music enough to risk everything performing it. He'd cracked open 1950s conformity with a hip shake and a sneer, showing kids that rebellion was possible, that you didn't have to accept the world as presented. He'd been beautiful, talented, generous, polite, troubled, exploited, and ultimately consumed by forces he'd helped create but couldn't control. The revolution he'd started continued without him. Rock and roll became the dominant cultural language. Black music finally getting some of the credit it deserved, though never as much as white interpreters received. Integration progressed, though Elvis's contribution to that progress was debated. What wasn't debatable was this: Elvis Presley changed what was possible in American culture, and American culture killed him for the gift. In the end, he was buried at Graceland, next to his mother in the Meditation Garden, a specially built mausoleum. Mother and son, reunited in death as they'd never quite been in. Life once fame separated them. The grave became a pilgrimage site, thousands visiting annually to pay respects to the king who'd lived like a pauper in a palace, who'd had everything and nothing, who changed the world and been destroyed by the changing. Legacy is complicated for revolutionaries. Elvis opened doors he never walked through, made music he never got to evolve, started conversations he didn't live to finish. His later years, the bloat, the jumpsuits, the pharmaceutical haze, threatened to eclipse the lean revolutionary who terrified America with his authenticity. But both versions were real. Both were Elvis. The tragedy is that he never got to be just Elvis Aaron Presley from Tupelo, who liked gospel music and loved his mama. Fame required he be either a threat or a joke, never simply human. 42 years old, dead on a bathroom floor, having sold over 1 billion records, having influenced everyone who came after, having broken barriers that needed breaking and paid prices nobody should have to pay. The revolution succeeded spectacularly. The revolutionary didn't survive long enough to see it. And maybe that was always going to be the story. Maybe America was never going to let Elvis Presley be both the catalyst and the beneficiary of the cultural earthquake he'd triggered. They still visit Graceland, still buy the records, still argue about his importance and his appropriation and his tragic trajectory. The Elvis impersonators multiply, each one a ghost of a ghost, performing a performance that was itself a performance of an authentic moment that disappeared the instant it became famous. The king is dead. Long live the king. The revolution continues. The revolutionary rests. What Elvis never understood, what maybe revolutionaries never do, is that the world doesn't want to be changed by people. It wants to be changed by symbols, by icons it can control and interpret and eventually dispose of when their usefulness expires. Elvis tried to remain human inside the symbol, tried to protect some core of self from the consuming hunger of fame. He failed. The symbol won. By the time he understood the terms of the bargain, it was too late to renegotiate. And so he became what America needed him to be: a cautionary tale dressed in a jumpsuit, a warning about the cost of stardom, proof that fame can destroy as efficiently as poverty. His music endures because it was genuinely transcendent, because in those early Sun record sessions and that '68 comeback special, you can hear a human soul touching something eternal. The rest, the movies, the Vegas years, the bloated decline, that's just what happens when culture consumes its revolutionaries instead of learning from them. Elvis Presley changed the world 3 times. The first time, he integrated American music by making black art acceptable to white audiences. The second time, he showed teenagers that their desires and rebellions were valid, creating youth culture as a force. The third time, he demonstrated that fame is a prison as much as a reward, that success American style can be a kind of murder. All 3 lessons cost him pieces of himself he never got back. By the end, there was nothing left to give. The revolution was complete. The revolutionary was gone. And America moved on to the next sacrifice, the next symbol, the next beautiful talent to build up and tear down in the endless cycle of celebrity consumption. But on quiet nights at Graceland, when the tourists have gone and the lights are dim, you can almost hear it, the ghost of a young man's voice, pure and hopeful, singing gospel to his mama in a 2-room shack in Tupelo, before the world knew his name and the name became more real than the man, before fame made authentic selfhood impossible and performance replaced being. That voice, untainted by what was coming, remains the truest version of Elvis Presley, the boy who loved music enough to risk everything, who paid for his revolution with his life, who changed the world and was destroyed by the changing, the voice that started it all, singing into darkness, hoping someone would hear and understand. Someone did, everyone did, and they loved him to death.